Hey everyone, welcome to The Explainer. Today we're doing something really cool. We are going to completely unpack the hidden legal architecture of our everyday lives. We're taking a deep dive into the anatomy of an idea to really demystify intellectual property. It's this invisible force that shapes everything from the art we totally love to the technology we literally rely on every single day. And getting a grip on it, well, it gives us the ultimate blueprint to modern innovation.
Okay, let's dive into this. Here is our roadmap for today. First, what is intellectual property? Second, the 7 categories of IP. Third, why protect intellectual property? Fourth, striking a societal balance. And finally, number 5, enforcement and constitutional rights. All right, kicking things off with Section 1, what exactly is intellectual property? To frame this, let me ask you kind of a provocative question. Who actually owns the idea of a sunrise? I mean, think about it. If an artist paints this stunning sunrise, they own the copyright to that specific painting, right? No one else can legally copy that exact canvas without their permission. But the idea of the sunrise itself, that remains entirely 100% free. Literally anyone can look at the horizon, get inspired, and paint their own version. Intellectual property doesn't protect the abstract idea. It protects the human expression and the concrete application of that idea. And you know, this whole concept isn't just for high art or some super complex software. It grounds our entire daily reality. We bump into intellectual property at literally every single step of our day. When you wake up, your morning cereal, the pasteurized milk in its little Tetra Pak, the sleek design of your car. Practically everything you touch is the product of human ingenuity, knowledge, and skill. Before any of those items could be lawfully manufactured, an intellectual property right had to be respected. So the absolutely crucial point here is understanding the difference between the tangible and the intangible. Tangible property is corporeal, like a plot of land or a building. The very fact that you physically possess a piece of land naturally excludes someone else from having it. But intangible property, that's incorporeal. It's non-physical and derives its value entirely from ideas. Because creations of the mind, like a genius new invention or a best-selling book, can be so easily reproduced, they require highly specific legal frameworks just to prevent unauthorized copying. Ultimately, when lawyers talk about property, they aren't just talking about a physical object. They're talking about a bundle of rights conferred by law, by virtue of ownership. Whether it's tangible or intangible, property gives you the right to possess it, use it, dispose of it, and, crucially, exclude others from using it.
Moving right along to Section 2, the 7 categories of IP.
So the World Trade Organization's TRIPS agreement officially recognizes 7 primary categories that govern global trade. They are copyright, trademarks, geographical indications, industrial designs, patents, layout designs of integrated circuits, and undisclosed information. Let's do a rapid-fire breakdown of these.
Let's start with patents, which is one of the oldest forms of IP protection out there. A patent is a statutory right granted to an inventor for a strictly limited period. But listen, it's not handed out easily. No way. To get a patent, an invention has to meet 3 incredibly strict criteria. It must have absolute novelty, involve a clear inventive step, and be capable of actual industrial application. If it hits all 3, the owner gets to exclude anyone else from manufacturing or selling it without permission.
Next up, we have trademarks. These are those distinctive symbols, logos, or signs that help us consumers distinguish between competing goods or services. And this brilliantly illustrates the sheer power of branding, right? Think of the iconic star on the front of a Mercedes or the super familiar Coca-Cola logo. They instantly guarantee the brand's origin. But a trademark has to be distinctive, and it cannot be deceptive. You couldn't, for example, market fake leather goods under the trademark real leather, because that would completely deceive the consumer. Then there's copyright. Circling back to our sunrise hook from earlier, copyright protects the original expression of an idea, whether that's literary, musical, or artistic. But again, not the idea itself. It also importantly comes bundled with the doctrine of fair use. This means the work can actually be used without it being considered infringement for things like education, criticism, and news reporting. Now, geographical indications, or GIs for short, are super fascinating because they contrast so heavily with trademarks. A GI is a sign used on goods that have a highly specific geographical origin, and their qualities are due solely to that specific place. Think of champagne from France or Kolhapuri chapels from India. A GI doesn't belong to a single corporate enterprise. It actually belongs to the region's specific soil, climate, or traditional methods of production. Category number 4 is industrial design. This one protects the ornamental or purely aesthetic aspect of an article. We're talking its shape, pattern, or color. It serves entirely as product differentiation to basically lure customers in with visual appeal. It applies to everything from luxury watches and furniture all the way up to huge architectural structures. But remember, it does not protect the technical function, only the appearance. Finally, rounding out the 7, we have layout designs and undisclosed information. These are the modern, really tech-driven protections. Layout designs protect the mind-bogglingly complex topography of integrated circuits on computer chips, which require just massive investments of capital and skill. Undisclosed information, on the flip side, protects vital trade secrets. It restricts unfair competition and enforces honest practices in the commercial world. Which brings us to Section 3, why protect intellectual property?
Now, what's really interesting about this is how we can pit the industrial reward mindset of John Locke against the more artistic soul of George Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel. In the capitalist system, Locke propounded the labor justification. He argued that when an individual takes something from nature, the commons, and mixes their own hard labor with it, they create value and therefore property. Hegel, on the other hand, offered the personality justification. He argued that property is the direct embodiment and expression of the creator's persona. So while a patent for a new factory machine might align perfectly with Locke's labor view, a copyright on a deeply personal, emotional novel brilliantly reflects Hegel's personality view.
Zooming out for a second, the whole global IP regime essentially rests on 3 underlying societal premises. First, we really want to encourage creative activity. Second, we have to recognize that this creativity just won't happen in adequate quantities without providing clear economic incentives. And third, the system aims to ensure just economic returns to the creator, while simultaneously safeguarding the broader public interest. Without the promise of an economic reward, innovation would frankly just stagnate. But here is the catch. Monopolies are inherently dangerous. That means the state must constantly temper the exclusive rights of creators with the public's absolute need for access. Okay, Section 4, striking a societal balance. So how does all this philosophy turn into actionable law? Well, the law prevents absolute monopolies through a few crucial balancing mechanisms. First off, exclusive rights are always limited to a set time period. Once that timer runs out, the creation enters the public domain for everyone to use freely. Second, the state will step in and deny IP rights entirely if an invention harms human life, the environment, or public morality. And third, if an IP owner abuses their right, let's say by hoarding a life-saving drug just to keep prices artificially high, the state can issue what's called compulsory licensing, which allows others to produce it to ensure the public actually gets the benefits. You see, intellectual property rights are actually defined in the negative. They aren't this absolute positive right to just do whatever you want. They are meant specifically to stop others from unauthorized copying. It is fundamentally a defensive tool. The law makes sure that protecting individual property is balanced by distributive justice and totally respects the rights of other entrepreneurs to exist and compete in a healthy market, which naturally leads us to wonder how these rights hold up in the messy real world. And that brings us to our final part, Section 5, Enforcement and Constitutional Rights. Because honestly, how do you abstract philosophical ideas and delicate legal balancing acts survive the very real-world threats of commercial piracy? Well, a right is really only as good as its enforcement. The TRIPS agreement strictly mandates that national laws must provide speedy, fair, and equitable enforcement procedures. These remedies have to be cost-effective to fight massive, commercial-scale counterfeiting. But they also must not create weird barriers to legitimate, honest trade. To deter future infringement, courts are even empowered to grant injunctive relief and literally order the physical destruction of infringing materials. But sometimes that enforcement hits a pretty massive constitutional wall. Take the Constitution of India, for example. While it makes no specific mention of intellectual property anywhere, IP is actually treated under Article 300A, which deals with property rights. Interestingly, while private property is protected by law, it is no longer considered a fundamental right in India. And wow, does that set the stage for some deep legal friction? And that specific friction brings us to a powerful question to wrap up this explainer. Where exactly is the line between intellectual property and our fundamental freedom of speech? Just think about it for a second. Copyright literally grants a monopoly over expression, but freedom of speech and expression is a fiercely guarded, fundamental human right. So when a broadcaster's right to control their content clashes directly with the public's fundamental right to receive information, which one should actually win out? It's this massive tension that just continues to evolve as our technology advances. And it's a question I really want you to carry with you as you navigate the heavily branded, patented, and copyrighted world around you. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and definitely keep questioning the ideas around you.